Hi there. So we're just going to now go through how you would produce a layout. A layout is something that you potentially would want to do with ArcMap. You may want to use this to print a map, or you may also want to use it to export a map. But it's really the kind of tools that are in ArcMap for presenting maps in a sort of presentational way for various purposes. We started to organise all our data now inside our geodatabase. So we can start to bring this all together now into an attractive kind of layout that we can print from or export. We're going to base it on the work we've been doing already, which is the college, the Hadlow Farm fields. So I've already created the fields, so I'm going to just bring those across, which is actually, there we go, fields. And if you remember, these are the fields that we've actually extracted out of the master map data, so they're nice and accurate. We've also digitized the boundary as well, so we can drag that over. There we go, so that's the boundary. And we'll talk about colouring these and changing those in a minute. I'm just going to get the data in to start with. We're also going to put some sort of base map behind it as well. So I've got the 25k here, which is in a catalogue, so I can just drag that across as well. And again, it's put it on the top, so I'm just going to have to go over here to the layers, and I'm going to reorder it and stick it at the bottom. This is we're currently in the data view, and we can flick between the data view and the layout view. The layout view is kind of the what you'll see is what you'll get view. And it's kind of almost like a print preview window, and it gives us a whole load of other tools inside here for making a more presentational version of the map or the data that we've been working on. So there's a few things that we want to change with this map initially. Notice that it's by default it's chosen to give us a portrait view, so I want to change that immediately over to landscape, so that's quite straightforward. We just go over to page and properties, and we can adjust that to a landscape view. And again, we can change to different paper sizes, but we're going to be outputting as an A4 paper size, so that's fine. And then by doing that, we notice that this box, which is called the data frame, and is currently showing us everything under our existing layers over here on the left, has just stayed the same size, so it's easy enough to just go and grab those little corners and resize the data frame to make it whatever size we want. So I'm just going to, for now, I'm just going to make it fill up the A4 page. Now if you don't have these little handles, for whatever reasons, you want to just go and make sure that you've got this tool selected up here on the toolbar, the Select Elements tool. And of course you can either move it around by holding the left button and dragging, or you can just grab the handles and resize it as well. So that's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to just resize it roughly just to fill the page for now, and then we'll come back and play around with it a bit more shortly. So there we go. So everything that is turned on over here will be displayed in the layout, and of course we can switch things on and off, and then of course they won't appear on the printed layout that we end up exporting or printing from. So that's one way of controlling what happens when we do a layout. And of course everything that we do over here in terms of changing colours and symbols and shapes and also the transparency of things will also be affected on the layout view as well. So it's quite useful. There are some quite useful techniques here to improve the way that the map might look. The first thing I'm going to do is go and change the boundary. I don't want it to be a filled colour, I just want it to be a hollow shape, and I want to give it an edge, a thicker edge than the 0.0 that it starts with. So I'm going to put that up to maybe 4, and I'm going to give it a red line. So there we go, that looks a bit more useful. So that's kind of giving us a much clearer view of Hadlow College and its ownership boundary. So again, we can go and change that up here. So I'm going to call it ownership boundary. and in fact whatever you type up here will actually come out in the key that we produce in the layout shortly. So I guess we need to look at the Hadlow fields next. And what we want to do is go to the properties, and actually we're going to colour these up and make them look a little bit more interesting based on the type of habitat that we have there. So to do that we need to go to Symbology, and again we've got different ways of kind of symbolising the data depending on what the attributes are that are sitting behind each of those polygons in the table. Currently it's just symbolising everything in one colour, so it's not really telling us very much information actually about those particular fields. So we can go into category, and we can actually choose from various options here, but initially we're going to just look at this first one, unique values, and if we look through here it gives us all of the table field names for the data there that's sitting behind each of those polygons. And I know that in the legend column we've got some useful information which we can use to look at the different habitats, or at least symbolise the different habitats in a more interesting way. So I'm going to go and add all the values from that particular. So there we go. We've only got two different habitats here, so we've got natural surface and we've got scrub. And again, by default the computer just chooses some colours. If you don't like those colours, it's easy enough, you can just double tap there and you can go and change to whichever colour you prefer. So I'm just going to change that to a lighter green, and I might just change that scrub to maybe to a brown or something like that. And again we can just click over here and we'll get the whole big colour palette come up. So just go to a brown. So actually I've done the outline colour, I meant to do the fill colour. So brown, there we go. And we're going to give it no outline, so there we go. And then I'm going to apply that. So we're starting to see a little bit more information now about our map, so we can now see that those two areas are bits of scrub and the rest is all identified as natural surface, which is in effect grass. But of course anything that you've put in those attribute tables can be used to symbolise the map. But you can see how quickly you can generate something slightly more interesting, which gives you more information just by choosing some of the attributes to symbolise. And we notice over here as well that we've started to get some more information in our key, which will come out shortly in a minute. So one thing I forgot to mention, we also need to switch off this top one here. So I just simply double clicked on there and that will just open up the layers palette. So if we do that and I apply, the other thing also, we've got a heading in here as well, which again can and sometimes be useful. I think we can actually, if we want to, we can remove that. Actually we can't, let's remove the whole lot. I'm going to add all values again. We can either remove the wording altogether, which you may want to do, or you can write something different in there, so I'm just going to simply remove it. So there we go. And immediately the map is starting to look a little bit more interesting than it did 5 minutes ago. There's a few other things that we also want to think about. Titles. Generally maps will always have titles on them, so we've got a whole load of things that we can actually add to the map here. Title is really simple, we just select that and then we can just type a title in. So I'm just going to give it a name, Phase 1 Habitat Survey, and then we just accept that, and then it should give us a title. There we go. So we can, again, if we want to rename, or sorry, if we want to change the title, we can simply go in there and we can change the symbols, which means we can change the font style, the size of the font, the colour, and we can play around with all the kind of the way the font looks really. So I'm going to just leave it as the default for now, but that's pretty straightforward, I think. So the other things that all maps will have is a north line. Again, you've got different options for north lines here, so you can kind of choose one and then you can just accept it and then it will appear, and again you get the handle so you can resize it. Again, not very useful when it's sitting over the top of something else, so there's quite an easy way around that. If we double tap it, we go to the properties of the actual north line, and if we go to the frame properties, we can give it a background colour. So if I give it a white background, and what I'm going to do is apply that, and you'll notice that it's given it a white background, but it's come right to the very edge of the actual shape, the north shape. So if we give it a bit of space by putting an X and Y gap in, we'll get a bit more white space around it. So I'm going to push that up to 5 on each X and Y, and then apply that. So we'll get a little bit more. There you go. You see a bit more white space around it, so it's a bit easier to read. Again, you can play around with these things, resize, recolor, do whatever you like. So that's that. The next thing we're going to do is insert a scale bar. Again, you've got various choices of scale bar here. Kind of default templates. So I'm just going to choose whichever, that's fine. Actually, I might choose that one. And again, if you really want to, you can go and play around with the properties of these things to your heart's content, but I generally just accept the default. And again, it's stuck it there. So again, you can decide where you want to put these things. And I'm going to probably just make a bit of white space underneath so that I can put the scale bar away, so that it's not completely obscuring the map as well. So there we go. And again, we can actually double tap on that and we can bring up the properties. So at the moment it's set to miles. We can change it to different divisions, different units. I'm going to select meters, more useful possibly. So there we go. It's kind of starting to come together now as a map. The one thing we need to now put on is the key, and the Americans call it legend. So again, we've got an option over here to generate a legend, so that's quite straightforward too. So I'm just going to go through. The first screen is really saying which things do you want to use in your legend. I don't really need to have a legend for that OS 25K, so I'm going to remove that from the list. And I do want to show what the boundary is, and I also want to show the key for the fields as well, so I'm going to leave those two over here in the legend items side of things. Again, I would call it a key rather than a legend, so I'm going to change that to a key. Again, you can change the fonts here as well, but again, normally the default settings are fine. I'm going to put some colour behind the key because it's difficult to see it otherwise, particularly if you're overlaying it on the top of a map, so I'm going to give it a white background. And I'm going to, generally on these, I'm going to accept the defaults. And then there's a possibility to change these things if you wish to, but most of the time it does a reasonable job of creating. There we go. So I think that's not a bad job it's done. And again, it's really important to try not to cover up things that are important in your map when you're putting your key, so deciding on where to put these things is quite important. So I'm putting it down here because I know it's kind of out of the way and it's not a real problem. So the map's almost there now. There's a couple of other things we could do if we really wanted to. We can adjust the transparency of the base map, which again, if we go into the layer properties and I just double clicked on the actual layer itself and then brought up the properties and go to display, I can change the transparency. So maybe just knock it back a little bit just so that it's not so dominant on the page. So that kind of makes it a little bit fainter, a bit more faded. So that can be quite useful. Another thing that can also be quite useful is to make these also slightly transparent so you can actually see the map underneath. So that's an easy process. Again, I'm just double tapping on the layer, and again I'm going to display, and I'm just going to again set the transparency there to about, I don't know, 40. And again, you can come back and play around with these things, and we'll see how that works. So now we can see a bit more detail through the map. We're starting to get there now. The only things that we haven't really added to this layout is the copyright information. And that's something really important. There's always going to be copyright information, whether it's for the OS mapping itself or for this master map data as well. So yeah, you've got to go out and find that information and somewhere get that written on the text, or sorry, get the text written on your layout. And again, you've got a sort of free text box that you can do that kind of thing in. You can also bring in other things like images as well, which sometimes can be useful. So I'm just going to go and grab an image. Generally, you would use things like JPEGs. So this can be quite useful. So I'm just going to grab an image, and again gives you the option to resize the image to whatever you like. And I've just moved the wrong thing. I've just moved the map. How annoying. So again, click on the image, and again you get the handles come up, and you can resize it to whichever you like. And of course that can be moved around as well. So all these things can be moved around completely independently of each other. So we're almost there now. Something else that's often quite useful actually is to insert a kind of locating map into your layout, which I'm going to just show you how to do now. This is a data frame that we're using here, and it's basically displaying everything that you see over on the left hand side in the layers area of the table of contents. Now we can add multiple data frames in here, which means we can display different mapping information at the same time as displaying this background map. So I'm just going to quickly show you how to do that. So we want to add a new data frame. We go up to insert a data frame, and what happens is we get a blank frame with nothing in it here, which can be resized and rescaled, and also we get another menu. We get another sort of space over here in the table of contents, which is the new data frame. Of course, they can be labeled to whatever you want. And we can then start dropping different maps and different information in here, and of course that will only display inside this new data frame. So it can be quite useful for showing multiple maps on the same layout. So what I'm going to do is just go and grab some other information just to drop in there, just to kind of give you an idea of how you might want to use it. So I've got some other Ordnance Survey data that I've gone and got from somewhere else, which I'm going to use I think this time. So I've got a map of, I believe I've got a map of the UK. So I can just drag that over here, or actually into the data frame, either one will work. I'm going to drag it over here for now, and you'll see. So it's there, it's separate, so it's on this new data frame, and it's not with the original layers. So therefore it sits completely independently inside this new data frame. And as long as that data frame is selected, we can flick back to the data view, and that's all we'll see. And again, if we go back to the layout view and then choose the other data frame and go back, we will see that. So we can flick between the two data frames, which is kind of useful. And again, I don't think we can do it there. We have to actually be in the layout view to do it. Yes, we have to be in the layout view. So we've got to go back to the layout view, select the data frame, and then go back. But what it does mean we can do is perhaps zoom in a bit closer to the southeast of England, and then we can flick back to this layout view, and you start to see what happens. You're starting to get a smaller view, but it's giving you it's a way of kind of combining more than one map together. Again, at the moment it's not particularly meaningful. We could obviously have a play with that. Again, I'm going to just I need to check the properties of this because I want to make the and you need to just have it selected and then right click and go to properties, and I'm going to go to the frame properties again, and I'm going to give it a white background because at the moment it's kind of being lost. So there we go, that looks a bit more useful. Again, we can resize this to whichever size we like, so maybe make it a bit smaller. But you kind of start to get the idea that you can put maps within maps, which is useful for a whole load of presentational reasons. So that's really the sort of basics of starting to pull together a layout based on some data that you've actually brought into ArcMap. And then you may well want to print from this, or you may want to export it. Again, printing is pretty straightforward, so you've got a print command and then you will just send it through to your printer. And then you've got the option to export as well into various different formats. And depending on what you're doing, you may well choose different format. I mean, for this purpose, I'm going to export as a PDF, and that's generally the sort of a good format for exporting maps to. So I'm just selecting the PDF option from there. And again, the software gives you the option to save it anywhere on your computer. So I'm just going to stick it on my desktop just temporarily. And you can play around with the resolution here. Again, the default seems to be reasonable, and this is quite a good way if you want to email maps to people, and it gives you quite a reasonable resolution as well. So just simply save that. It's pretty straightforward. And then that's now turned it into a PDF document, so we can now just pop back to our desktop and have a look at the PDF document, which is not there. That's very interesting. We must have saved it somewhere else. The other option as well, we can save in various other kind of formats as well. Probably the most other obvious option would be something like a JPEG, because you may want to use it on a website, for example, or a TIFF may be also another one if you wanted, if this was going to be used in a high quality print job, and maybe you were going to put it into a leaflet or something like that, or onto an external kind of interpretive panel or something. So that, you've got various different options for exporting the data out of here as well. So that's really kind of an overview of creating a simple layout in ArcMap.